all, the background. So my family and I have just moved from Louisville, Kentucky in the U.S. to warm, sunny Venice, Florida. So this is day 2. We are still unpacking boxes. The background. So my family and I have just moved from Louisville, Kentucky in the U.S. to warm, sunny Venice, Florida. So, so Damian, I'm getting a feedback and a re-recording. The background. So my family and I have just moved from Louisville, Kentucky in the U.S. to warm, sunny Venice, Florida. So, so Damian, I'm getting a feedback and a
Okay, I'm turning down.
All right, let's try that again, see how this goes. Okay, there we go, that's better. So we're still moving in, day 2 of unpacking boxes, and this will eventually be my office.
Try to figure out how to make this work.
All right, we'll give Damian a moment to fix this. Okay, there we go, that's better.
Okay, sorry about it. Stop it.
Okay, is that better? Are you ready to go?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay. So we're still unpacking boxes, so I apologize for the mess in the back. But it is warm here, and I'm glad it's not, I'm not where it's cold and snowing anymore. Let me give you a little context, because that's the lens through which I'm presenting tonight, and what you'll see and what I've pulled out as key nuggets, things that are that I think are useful for coaches with respect to coaching with the brain in mind. So my background, I said, was in human resources, and I started doing OD work in mostly manufacturing companies. I moved to Humana to do some organization development work, and I have been using external coaches in my previous role in manufacturing, and they asked if I wanted to start the executive coaching practice at Humana. Humana is a health insurance, well-being, and benefits provider for individuals, corporations and businesses, and senior citizens in the U.S. So I said, yes, I would love to, because I really wanted to go deeper into coaching. So you can imagine how receptive a company full of, no offense to anyone on the call, actuaries, financial analysts, physicians, clinicians, insurance experts, they thought this whole notion of having a coach, gathering feedback, having a coach ask you questions was a little too fluffy. And they said, that's kind of nice, but it's not for us. And so I pondered, what aspect of coaching would attract and engage executives and leaders in a very data-based healthcare clinical setting. That was about 2006. And about that time, we got neuroscientists and social science researchers focusing on their applications in human performance, coaching, performance feedback, human resources, training and development. And so we had this emergence and focus on the science of coaching and how can what we know about how the brain works help us in coaching. So I brought that to bear to the coaching practice and said, what if we took a brain-based approach to coaching, and we focused primarily on reflection, insights, and how people can use their brains to have better ideas and better solutions that help themselves and their teams. That was something that everyone at Humana was interested in. So I based and launched the coaching practice on the science and neuroscience of coaching and how our brains work. And it really went well. It took off very quickly. I brought in external coaches who were using brain science approaches to coaching. I got trained as a coach like you are. I became certified through ICF. I brought in another internal coach. So we had 2 full-time internal coaches inside the company. I developed a dashboard and some return on coaching measurements, because corporations like to see data that shows this really works and how it works. And I just loved it. It was just fantastic. So I really became connected to how does the brain help us or hurt us? Where does it get in the way? And how can it help us get phenomenal results as coaches? And how can we help our clients use their brains in a way that such that when coaching is over, they are are trained, they're aware of how their brain is operating, and they can create those kinds of insights and have those reflection moments even after the formal coaching engagement ends. So my whole experience and lens for this is from an internal coach, a business coach, a Fortune 70 US corporation. So those are kind of my blinders. And you'll hear me talk about examples through that lens as well. I left Humana to start my own firm in 2015. And so I continue to expand my approach to brain-based coaching, brain-based coach supervision. I also speak to corporate leaders and at conferences about how to use your brain to lead performance management. What's the brain science behind feedback conversations? And how do we use our brains to be better humans at work in the workplace? And so I'll be happy to give you some examples and reference that as well. So just kind of be aware that that's the lens through which I've learned and applied all this, and that's what I'll be sharing with you today. All right, so I'm going to share my screen with you. I have some PowerPoint slides, and I've sent, oops, the right one. Let's see. So do you see the slide that says "Be a coach with the brain in mind"?
Yeah, it looks good, Jeff.
Perfect, great. So, what I'm proposing and learning and sharing with you today are applications. So we'll talk a little bit about the brain science behind approaches to coaching, but I'm really going to talk about specific applications for you as the coach and for you to use with your coaching clients to make your coaching conversations, to make your coaching sessions, and to make your coaching practice stickier, resonate, stay with your clients and with yourself, and know when your brain is really helping you and when your brain is kind of getting in the way and how to manage that. All right, so let's first talk about your brain on coaching. So we're going to focus on 3 parts of the brain and how they are engaged in the coaching process. And some of this you may have heard before, but I think how it comes together in coaching and how we explain it to our clients is very powerful and can be really useful. So the 3 areas are the amygdala, the prefrontal cortex, and basically your long-term memory. So the amygdala, of course, is in the center of your brain. It's in the limbic system. That's the emotional center of your brain. And as most all of you know, it's the filter through which you experience everything. Whether you're conscious of it or not, or it's just below consciousness, we experience the emotional aspect of everything around us first, and then we process it into something that we might consider to be rational or logical or database. Usually it's not, but that's the driver of everything. And as many of you have probably experienced already, when some people start coaching, they're a little nervous about it. They're uncertain about what it is. They want to do new and different things they haven't been able to do through training or mentoring or sponsorships or other types of development activities, but sometimes they come a little apprehensive to the coaching session and to the coaching experience. That's our amygdala telling us something is new, something is different, we need to watch out for it. It's also the place where we get hijacked, and you've probably heard of the amygdala hijack, where our emotions are so extremely positive, like when we're at a sports event and we're cheering for our favorite team, or when they're extremely negative or defensive or threatened, like when someone tries to outdo us. We have a teenage son. When you're a teenager, defies you and tells you they're not going to do something. You know, as a parent, your amygdala just fires off and you have no control over your responses. The emotions just take over. So that's the primary part of the brain that is going to be engaged in a lot of our coaching. The next part is the prefrontal cortex, and that's a spot right behind your forehead. It's a very small portion of the brain. When you think about magnitude and the size of your brain, it is the part of your brain where you take in new information. You tease out what you're learning, seeing, experiencing. You make decisions about what you're looking at or experiencing. You figure out how you want to use that information or what you want to do with it. You find a solution, you find an insight, and then your brain quickly tucks that back into long-term memory. The long-term memory is where we go on autopilot. In essence, it's every neural map, every collection of stories and experiences that we have hardwired into our brain, so our brain doesn't have to think about it anymore. So when you're driving to work and you're taking the same route every day, or you're doing things that seem normal or natural and you're not even thinking about it, those are basically neural maps that are all over your brain, but a large portion of it is hardwired in the back of your brain. Everything from the nervous system that keeps your diaphragm going so you can breathe, all the way to, oh yeah, I've seen this before, I don't have to relearn this again, and your brain takes over and puts you on autopilot. Now, while that all might be interesting, it's the dynamic between these parts of the brain that we really want to focus on in coaching. So when our brains have some kind of trigger or threat or emotional imbalance, if you will, for the moment, that takes our amygdala away from being in a neutral to slightly positive emotion. If we're extremely excited, like we're at a sports game and we're cheering for our favorite team, or we're negative, defensive, or threatened, or frightened, or fearful, that shuts down the prefrontal cortex. They cannot be operating fully at the same time. It's why when my teenager defies me and I scream and yell, that I have no new thought. I'm not taking in new information in my prefrontal cortex. I'm just reacting emotionally, and there's probably nothing I can do there's nothing that would pop into my brain to help me unless I do something intentionally to dampen my amygdala. So for our coaching clients, we want them to come to our sessions and get their amygdala, get their emotions in a neutral to slightly positive state. That opens up their prefrontal cortex so they can take in the coaching questions that we have for them. It causes them to think about their thinking instead of thinking about the problem. It gets their brains in a reflective state. And it takes them off of their long-term memory. Most all of their past experiences, all the things they do automatically, the things that have been getting in the way, or it might have been really useful experience in the past, but it's not helpful in the moment, because in coaching, we're trying to help them generate new thinking, new insights. So this is similar to what you probably experience when you're not thinking about a problem or a challenge you're having. It's not even on your mind. And sometime over the weekend, while you're in the shower, an insight, an aha moment pops in your brain, and you realize that's the answer or the next step to solving your problem. You may have that while you're driving home from work. Some people have it when they're on vacation. Lots of people have it when they are just taking a walk, or they're engaged in yoga or meditation. All those insight aha moments occur in the prefrontal cortex, that spot right behind your forehead. And it turns out they're not random. They occur not because you're in the shower or because you're working out. They occur because your amygdala is at a neutral to slightly positive emotional state. You're not focused on the problem, and you're not thinking about the past or your previous experience. And you're not thinking about the problem, you're thinking about your thinking. You're actually reflecting, you're doing something else, you're focused elsewhere that allows two synapses, two neurons to connect that didn't before, and that's your new moment. That's your new insight. That's the next step that pops into your head that gets you closer to achieving your coaching goal. And that's what we want to do in coaching. We want to open up the prefrontal cortex of our clients, help them have lots of those insight, aha moments throughout the coaching session, and then make a decision about what to do with those to help them get closer to their coaching goals. All right, so that's the end of the neuroscience academic brain scan portion of our talk. The rest will actually be about applications in coaching. So keep this in mind when you think about what state do I want my coaching client's brain to be in most of the time so they can have insights. And that is this state. As a coach, it's also useful for us to think about when our amygdalas, when our emotions are triggering a response or a way that we're being present that gets in the way of the coachee, the coaching client? And how do we keep our prefrontal cortex open so we can do all of the basic coaching competencies, listen intently, watch for goals, help set contracts? We have a lot of things that we're trying to manage in our brains while we're the coach, but those things cannot get in the way of the coaching moment itself, of the exchange we're having with our coachees. So I want you to think about, for the most part, being able to get your own brain as a coach in that emotionally neutral to slightly positive state so you can have insights in the moment. So you're reflecting on who you're being as the coach. So you can think about your own thinking and not be focused on the problem either. All right, so how do we get started? I know most of you probably do something that helps your coachee, your coaching client, transition from whatever they were doing before the coaching session started and help them get into the coaching session. And I really can't emphasize this enough. This is an important part of our responsibility as coaches, but it's also the gift that we give to our coachees. When I worked in corporate settings and I was an internal coach at Humana, every time a coaching client sat down in front of me, they had just come from another meeting, another challenging conversation with the team, another complex issue they were trying to solve, and there's no way to coach a brain that's too busy, that's too focused on other things. So you can do this in a lot of different ways. 30 minutes of yoga before the coachee steps into your session is an awesome way to have this done. 20 minutes of meditation if they know how to do that. But in my situation, my corporate clients were like, there's no way I'm doing 30 minutes of yoga before I come see you. That's just not going to happen in this corporate building. It's not going to happen in this business. So we have to find ways to have conversations that help our coaching clients get centered. And here's one that I learned that I have continued to use for about 14 years, and I'm still astounded by how it works. It's called clearing the space. And it's basically calling out what's in the background for me. Like as I get started in the coaching session, what my brain is trying to get me to pay attention to that I do not want to pay attention to the session is, and I name it. Like what's in the background for me is all the moving boxes behind me and all the work I have to do to get settled into the new house. I don't tell a big story about it. I don't go into a lot of detail. I just name the thing that my brain is trying to get me to pay attention to that's distracting me right now. The next thing I do is name the emotion around that. And the emotion around that is, and then I name the emotion. So the emotion around all these boxes and moving around and getting settled is, what is the emotion? It is, it's anxiety. It's a nervousness. So the emotion around that is anxiety. And then I actually say, and I'm going to set that aside for our coaching session today. It turns out that when we name an emotion, a specific name for the emotion that we're feeling, you would think it would ramp up our amygdala. It would get us fired up, right? It would cause our emotions to go into overdrive. It doesn't. Functional MRI studies show that when you accurately, specifically name an emotion, it dampens your amygdala, and you get to put your emotions in a neutral to slightly positive state really quickly, and that's a really important piece of neuroscience. It really is kind of like what I don't know what it's like in your countries, but in the U.S., when the kindergarten teacher says to the young student, "Use your words, tell me how you're feeling," that's not just because they're trying to be touchy-feely or fluffy. When we name our emotions, it actually dampens that emotion and lets us have our prefrontal cortex open so we can make a different decision, a different choice. I clear the space for myself in front of the client. What's in the background for me is blank. The emotion around it is blank. I'm going to set that aside for our coaching session. And I clear the space on as many things that are in my way so I can be present for them in the session. And then I turn it around and I ask them to clear the space on as many things that their brain is trying to get them to pay attention to that is getting in the way of them stepping into the session. And I'll have to say that for corporate executives, this turns out to be one of the hardest things that they have to do in the sense that they're never really trained to do this. We don't have a large emotional vocabulary list as humans in general. We don't get taught a big emotional literacy course for the most part that gets us in touch with a variety of emotions. But once my coaching clients start to do this, it's the one thing they look forward to every time we sit down, and they start doing it outside their coaching session. So I have them clear the space on as many things as they need to. I have one client sit down in the conference room where we were having a coaching session, and I could tell as she plopped in the chair how distressed she was. And she said, I've just come from this horrible meeting. And I said, well, let's clear the space. We were about a third of the way through our 6 or 7 months of coaching together. So she cleared the space on several things. And then it went on for 2 minutes, and then 5 minutes. She cleared the space for 20 minutes of our coaching session. Now, as a coach, I thought this is great. At 2 minutes, she's really got this. Boy, has she internalized how to clear the space and clear her head. At 5 minutes, I thought, wow, there's a lot in there. And at 10 minutes, I started thinking about me, which was wrong, but I thought about me. I'm like, oh my gosh, we have so many coaching goals to get through. We only meet once every 2 weeks. She's taking up all the time with clearing the space. But at the end of 20, I just let her go. At the end of 20 minutes, I said, so how are you feeling now? And she said, that was so helpful. I feel so relaxed. I'm ready. She went through all 3 of her primary coaching goals, crafted new actions, and we finished early. We finished before the top of the hour. I could not believe it. So whatever you do to help your coaching clients get settled, get to a place where they can be reflective and be present in the session is really powerful. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen for just a second and ask you to take yourself off mute and offer up what are some things you do to get your coaching clients, if you've tried this before with anybody, to get them settled, to get them connected before the coaching actually begins. How do you get them settled in the session? Anyone have a practice or try something? Or maybe somebody's shown you a way as a coachee when you were coached by someone how to get settled and enter into the coaching session?
Like what we do here sometimes, and Damian will just have us take deep breaths to kind of center ourselves and to just kind of release the day. So we do that sometimes.
That's perfect. A lot of coaches use a solely somatic method. How can I use our bodies? How can I use my breathing? How can we get centered using strictly just the physiology of how we are being right? Other ideas?
Just the breathing, I think a couple of, a few breaths. I think I've done that with Carlos. Where's Carlos? Before we started the mentor coaching sessions. And to me, that was really good because that kind of brings you back and centers you before you start.
Exactly. Other ideas?
Sometimes, again, from that somatic standpoint of really tuning into what you're sitting on, how you feel, how you're being supported, maybe in a meditative state, or you're with your eyes closed, or maybe just simply spending that minute or two tuning into what you're feeling in your feet or your butt or your back or whatever is supported by, and how it feels, and just really being right there, right present.
That's exactly right. That's why yoga and meditation are so powerful. They incorporate all those things, and you can get someone's emotions to neutral to slightly positive really quickly. Open up their prefrontal cortex so they can have insights and they're not focused on the problem, and they get off of their long-term fixed experience. Any others before we move on?
I had a coach who began every session with asking me what I had created since the last time we met. So it was introducing me into the space of self-acknowledgement, and then he'd ask me what I was grateful for. So sinking into the space of gratitude and moving forward from there.
Yes. Gratitude is an automatic emotional dampening, prefrontal cortex opening, reflective experience. And you'll find that some of your coaching clients will be able to do that really quickly and easily, and others don't know how to pat themselves on the back. They can't acknowledge themselves, which is another great coaching moment. So yeah, getting them that skill and teaching them how to do that is powerful. What?
The normal check-in with coaches where we're, in a way, we're touching upon what's in the background for them. Sometimes we don't actually get the time to, or we get distracted, and we don't actually interrogate that emotion. The whole idea of parking the emotion, if we're working with very rational people who, for example, are seasoned negotiators, then they already have that rationale in. Let's put that aside for a moment. Yeah? So that will definitely resonate with them. And we see the mechanics of why that is effective. Thanks, Jeff.
Yeah, that's interesting. Depending on the skill or occupation or regular practice of your coachee, your coaching client, this may be something that they can connect with really quickly. When I coach people who have a strong spiritual background or religious affiliation, they equate it to some of the things that they think about during prayer, right? Which is another reflective state that helps you dampen emotions and focus on gratitude and get off the problem. So start to watch for these different ways to help people shift from what they've come from to getting into a reflective, present, almost relaxed state as the coaching session begins, because it turns out it's really, really powerful. All right, so let's talk a moment about how we actually dampen emotional responses. So I'm not here to suggest that we don't bring emotion into coaching. We do. It's kind of everywhere. Sometimes it's an overload, either from the coachee, our coaching client, or from ourselves. As a coach, there are moments where we don't want our emotions to kind of get in the way of the coachee or to dominate the session. There also may be moments where after the coachee or the client has experienced their emotions, that we want to help them get back to thinking and reflecting on how has what they just experienced helped them in this coaching moment or for a coaching goal, or is it connected to something else? So I'm going to share with you 5 different ways to actually dampen emotional responses when that's our intent, when we want to dampen them, when we think we need to dampen them, because that is going to be useful in the moment. So they fall into the following categories. The first is naming the emotion. We talked about that before in clearing the space. When you name an emotion, it dampens the amygdala, it drops emotions to that neutral to slightly positive state. Reframing emotions, looking for a different meaning. You've probably heard reframe a lot. It's now very common as a way for people to help shift their thinking from an emotional perspective. Reordering or reprioritizing the thing they're thinking about or the trigger that causes that emotion. Also normalizing it, not in the sense that, well, if it's unethical and my boss does it, it must be normal, I can do it too. No, this is a neuroscience term. When we talk about normalizing it, like identify what's usual or normal or exceptional. And when our brains realize what might be expected or natural or organic versus what is exceptional, then we can dampen those emotions. Repositioning it, looking at this trigger or this emotion or this thing that triggers the emotion from other perspectives. So how do you do all these? Well, good news, there are no probes or electrodes that you put in any coachee's brain to get this to work. We do this through the power of coaching questions. So on the next slide are a list of these types of questions. So naming the emotion is obviously what we did before, being specific, succinct and accurate in how you name the emotion. Reframing it for yourself or for your coaching client sounds like this. What can I learn from this, or what am I curious about? How can what this thing is that may be triggering me help me to achieve what's important for me? How can this thing that might be negative or not useful have some useful edge for me? Reordering and reprioritizing. What priority really is this for me? Is this a priority now, or is it later? Is it for me or my team or someone else? Who needs to pay attention to this? And is it the most important thing to pay attention to right now, or is it not? Normalizing it. Here are the questions. Is this normal or expected? Does this happen elsewhere in the universe? Is this the first time in the history of human existence as we know it that this thing has happened? And the answer to those questions usually are, no, this is not as unusual as we think. When some of my corporate clients come in with challenges from budget cuts or reorganizations, or a CEO resigns, or a lawsuit hits the company, yes, they're dramatic, they're important, they demand attention. But is this the first time in the history of organizations these things have ever happened? No. Is it happening to them specifically? Did that act, was it because of them and to them? And 99.9% of the time it's no, I'm just somebody who has to deal with it and focus on it and help fix it. So when we are in the process of thinking how unique or important is this for us and how normal in the grand scheme of things is it, our brain realizes I'm not the only person that's threatened here. This is not the universe pointing all of its guns at me and aiming, right? And then finally, repositioning it. Looking at the issue, topic, or event through other lenses. What are the different points of view that I can look at through this? If I looked at this from 2 weeks ago, how would I experience this? If I were to look at this from our customer's perspective, what might that look like? If I looked at this from how my manager sees this, if I look at this from how the people that are in my community organization, anytime we have our brains shift and look or consider things from different perspectives, it dampens our amygdala, gets it to neutral to slightly positive, opens our prefrontal cortex, and dampens and shuts down our past experience that might be getting in the way. So I offer this up as a way for you to be able to, in the moment, dampen your own emotions if they get in the way of you being a coach, especially if it's a moment where you need to be objective or you need to be present and your emotions are causing you not to be present. I also teach this to my coaching clients. So not only in the coaching session, when an emotion is not useful or it has the emotion has already served its purpose, if you will, gotten their attention on something, then how do we get them out of that emotional trigger to focus on what to do and how to move forward, or how to think differently, and what do they take away from this as they leave this emotional moment? We also, as coaches, get to deal with an awful lot of feedback, and our coaching clients are likely to be buried in it. There's nothing wrong with feedback, and I still know excellent coaches who do 15 to 20 interviews with the stakeholders who might be the manager or the direct reports of the coachee, or family and vendors, and they gather all this data. They may even shadow the coachee in their workplace or in their setting to see how they lead and what that's like. And there are other coaches I know who do none of that, but they use surveys and tools. Get some folks from Korn Ferry here. There's plenty of awesome tools out there. We are buried as coaches and coachees with avenues to gather data for feedback. And I think as a coach, I'm grateful for that, but it also means that we really need to take care of our coaching clients as they go through that feedback process. And most importantly, as coaches, we are going to be buried with a lot of data. I had one external coach at Humana that I used, and she was phenomenal, and she used a very well-known tool. And the report that came back had more than 250 pages of feedback for the coaching client. And I thought, oh, how in the world are they going to go through all that and filter out what's important? Likewise, I use some tools where the reports are very succinct. There's a couple of great graphs. There's a very short list of derailers or things that the coachee needs to focus on. But still, how do we turn that feedback into action? So what I want to share with you is some findings from social scientists and others who have taken feedback data and focused on what types of feedback data actually shift performance. What types of data in feedback are coachees most likely to take action on and do something about? And I offer this up as a way for you as a coach to help sift through the data to find these key nuggets to see if they resonate for your coaching client or for the coaching goals, so that you don't feel overwhelmed. Regardless of which tool you use, you don't feel overwhelmed with all the data. So Phil Dixon and several others have focused on 360-degree appraisal data over a 10-year time span. I think it's about a 14-year time span now, where they've done, well, they started a long time ago, but they're probably 8 years into really good data about this. And here's the types of data, the feedback that comes back. They've categorized it into 3 ways. One, there's feedback that's a generalization. This may be a handwritten comment, or it might actually be something that's generated from the feedback tool itself. But it sounds like this: create a better team culture, right? I mean, that's a very general, broad piece of feedback. It might be very useful and accurate, but it's a generalization. A second type of feedback that they call and categorize is called a task feedback. And it's something that's a little more specific. That is feedback that says something to the coachee like, schedule and lead more team meetings. So it's got a little, it's not quite as general, and you can sense there's verbs, tasks, actions that the coachee might glean from that. As a matter of fact, they might be present right there in the comment, right there in the feedback, right there in the report. And the third one is tasks plus detail, where feedback is very specific, like you should really have weekly team meetings where everybody shares their projects, and then the leader shares her vision, and then we take 10 minutes on team culture, and it's this really rigid kind of specific approach that's a solution to a solution that's offered to the coachee. The research shows that the most useful, actionable type of feedback that coachees are likely to move forward on and do something about is the task-based feedback, where it's specific enough for them to reflect on and think about, how does that help me with my coaching goals? It may actually have verbs, action words, and suggestions that get the coachee to they can either copy and paste, like just do that, or it sparks their own thinking about what to do next. And it's general enough in the sense that the coachee gets to decide how they want to apply it, where it goes, how it fits into how they lead or the coaching goals they have or what they're trying to get better at. And so, in some cases, I actually have my coachees go through and highlight the task-oriented feedback in their reports. I give them these examples and I say, one way to digest some of this is to go through and just highlight the things that you think are task-oriented. We may even put other colors around generalizations or tasks plus detail. It's not that the other categories aren't useful. It's just that that research shows that people are less likely to take action on those. I mean, if as a peer or a coach, and I tell you as my coachee, have weekly team meetings and do these 15 things my way, you're unlikely to do that because that's not your lens. It's not your experience. It's somebody else's. You might try it. It might be a little complicated to implement, but it's not likely to spark your own motivation and your own actions that you are then ready to do something about and move forward on. Likewise, generalizations are just exhausting to coachees. Be a better person, be a better leader, communicate more. I mean, they're just so unhelpful. And unfortunately, many stakeholders in their written feedback, where they get to create their own data and their own response, they just lean to generalizations. They can't get any more specific than that, and they just kind of throw that out there and lob it. So in addition to doing all that you do to help your coachees manage the stress of receiving 360-degree stakeholder feedback or interview results or a survey that's been done where they've gathered information, I think it's helpful to have them, to teach them how to review or dissect, if you will, or categorize the feedback. So then in the coaching session, the two of you can coach through what's the best use of the data we've just seen. What stands out as the most actionable that seems to align with your coaching goals right now? Which types of feedback are really unfamiliar and seem maybe even not applicable to your coaching goals, but you want to spend time looking at? It's okay to spend time coaching and looking at the task plus detail responses. There might be a nugget in there, right, that could be helpful. But copying and pasting all that detail into how the leader or the coachee is going to be, and what they're going to do new or different tomorrow is really unlikely to occur. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen for a second. I'd like you to take yourself off mute. Share with me what you think is a brain-based, emotionally dampening, relaxing way that you have helped coachees sift through feedback reports, or the way that you have experienced your own feedback reports as a coachee or someone who's received feedback from a survey, a tool, or an interview-based type of feedback experience.
Something that I like to do is definitely the first two that you were talking about, renaming the emotion and then also reframing it. That's something I really like to do.
Yeah, there are a lot of emotions that come up around feedback, and having them name emotions as they go through it is powerful. Sometimes I'll have the coachee go through and check off feedback or survey results in red that make them angry or spark their negative amygdala hijack, and the things in green that they love and that feel really good. Just so we know what that is and we can identify that, and it doesn't get in the way of us reviewing what's going to be useful. What else do you use or do?
I was just going to say that, and what I use is to, in the first minutes, really dig into, okay, but what things really don't make sense to you or get you angry or is packed of emotions, and hopefully take those in the first minutes, because if not, it sometimes blocks what you can do afterwards.
That's right, exactly. And Ben, are you at Korn Ferry?
Nope.
Carlos, that's me.
No, who was?
That's Carlos.
Yeah, Carlos. Thank you. So tell me what you're an expert in this. Tell me what you know and experience and what you've seen that works.
So what we try to do is to focus or reduce the impact of the feedback and just try to see it as a gift. A lot of our clients come to the feedback session completely freaking out. So, we try to then reduce that and also look at the good things that they're doing and then trying to focus on what they could do better and on a way that is not really hard, I would say. Also, using our competencies, we, instead of trying to someone not stop doing a competency that they are overusing, we try to use another one that they are not using that could help managing the competency that they are really overusing. Right. Because it's really difficult to stop someone to stop doing something that they usually do good, but it's better to focus on something that they are not doing that will reduce that overuse of a competency that they do really well.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for that. Other experiences and ideas?
So one of the things we recommend is getting the feedback and just reading it through without having any type of emotion, reading it through. Then the second part is to go back and look at those things that you are in agreement. So circling those things that you are in agreement, and also putting some dialogue why you're aligned with those things. And then the third piece is to underline the things that you feel that there's a disconnect, and also provide explanation why you feel there's a disconnect. And so that kind of brings the individual into our presence, where we have a talking point to start the dialogue and not making it so overwhelmed.
Thank you for that, Myrna. That is so important. You know, when I was at Humana, and I still do this with my clients because so many of them are remote and we meet by video conference, I have to introduce the feedback report by email, right? Mm-hmm. I send them the PDF of the report, and I've gotten where I give instructions just like Myrna does, and I say, I know this is going to be overwhelming, so here is some guidance. Skim it first. Don't read it from cover to cover. That's not the story. And depending on the assessment tool or the feedback tool, I tell them I give them some direction. Go to this section first, see what's interesting there, highlight it. In the open-ended comments where people typed in their responses, skim them and just highlight words that stand out for you, whether they're positive or negative. Just kind of get it out of your brain, the reaction you're having to those, and highlight those. If I know in an assessment or a 360 feedback tool that there are several different sections of the report and that some are not useful until we're in the coaching session together, I'll tell them, don't pay attention to report number 4. We'll do that one together in person. Spend your time on sections 2 and 3. And section 1 is really just an intro, and I've kind of given you that already in our previous session. So just guiding them dampens their amygdala, gives their prefrontal cortex something to focus on, and tells them how to take in the data. And here's the big thing, gets them off of their fear of every bad feedback experience they've ever had. From the time a manager came by their area and said, be in my office in 10 minutes, I need to give you some feedback, to the last time they had a performance review, to any other time they had a assessment tool or a 360 feedback. There are never experiences where people are like, oh, just give me more. That's OD and HR people. We live for that kind of stuff, right? But most of our coaching clients are not like that. So every time you give someone guidance in an email or a phone call or the coaching session before the feedback comes, you're dampening their emotional response. You're giving their prefrontal cortex an opportunity to open up and to be more present and reflective. And you're likely to help both of you focus on that task-oriented feedback that will be useful and actionable and will self-motivate the coachee instead of spending hours and hours on the generalizations and trying to wonder and figure out what that means, or the tasks plus detail where someone wants your coachee to be just like them and to do it their way, which many times is not useful to the coachee. So I think this is really powerful as coaches because we're never going to be in a situation where feedback is, I should say that, it's just, we want coaches to be able to go out and gather their own feedback informally in the moment, especially after coaching is finished, to get better and to be better people in the things they want to be better at. The feedback process we take them through in coaching is usually much more formal, much more in-depth, and I don't see an end to the number of tools and surveys and resources we're going to have at our disposal as coaches to use. So I think it's our job to help the coachees learn what to do in this really deep dive of feedback so that they can get better at that in the moment, 30-second gathering informal feedback as they go through their day. Because that's what keeps their learning going. That's what makes them adaptable and keeps them in the mode of pursuing their coaching goals even after the formal coaching engagement is ended. So we're at the top of the hour, and I'd like to take just a brief break so people can run to the restroom or get something to drink. We'll come back. I got just a few more things I want to share about the brain science of coaching, and then we'll open up to even greater dialogue once your brains have had a chance to reflect on these and other ideas for a moment. So Damian, why don't you tell me how long you all want to take a break for, and then I'll come back at that moment.
5 minutes. We take 5 minutes. So it's 5 o'clock, 5:05, or whatever you are in 5 minutes. Come back. Okay.
All right. See you in 5 minutes.
Okay, time's up. So people may start coming back. Okay, Jeff, I think that.
All right. So the next thing I want to share was something I heard from Richard Boyatzis, who has done a lot of functional MRI research around how the brain works and how coaching works. And I heard him speak as a keynoter 2 years ago at the Executive Coaching Conference sponsored by the Conference Board. So it's all corporate coaches who run coaching programs inside their organizations. And he had a new book that was about to come out, and the title was called Helping People Change. And I put the name of the book and the link to Amazon in the chat, so you're welcome to take a look at it. But he's really focused on how can coaches coach with compassion, and what does compassion look like in the brain? And so I've pulled a few of his findings that I think are really powerful for us to know as coaches. And whether you're a coach in training because you've never done this before and you're going to become a coach, or you're a great coach already and you're learning a new way, a new methodology and a learning experience with Damian, or you're just curious about coaching in general, I think some of his recent findings and his theories, his approaches about how coaches should coach with the brain in mind are really powerful. So I'm going to share 2 slides that summarize that, and we can discuss it as well. So Richard Boyatzis says, during coaching, we emphasize a lot of the reflective and introspective mode of people's brains. And we've been talking about that for the first hour because that's really, really important. Some of his research finds that at least when coaching people in organizations, coaches tend to focus on what actions are you going to take next? What is in your control? What do you think you want to lead or do? And while there's nothing wrong with that, quote unquote, he does call out the notion that we have these default mode networks in the brain that we coach, how to be reflective, how to think about your thinking and not focus on the problem. And we have these task positive networks in the brain where people jump into action, they do something, they control something, they pull a lever, something happens as a result of their coaching, and they shift a behavior of some kind. And what he says is both of these are important, but they are different sections of the brain that light up, that are activated in functional MRI studies. And his proposition is that effective coaching guides the coachee through both of these networks, how to reflect and how to do, how to be introspective and how to get out there and change something at different stages of coaching. And when he says stages, it can be different stages of the hour that you're coaching someone or different stages of the engagement. His call to action for us as coaches is that we need to be aware of our own dispositions and preferences for one of those networks. So I think it's useful as you coach or you think about becoming a coach and you get feedback in your mentor coaching, as you coach in duos and duets or triads or quartets as part of this training program, that you listen for and you gather feedback from others about, was I asking questions and coaching the other person in a reflective, introspective, think about your thinking? And did I do that a lot? Or was I coaching them toward action and doing something and changing behaviors? And did I tend to do that more than the other? Where do we tend to lean as coaches? So I'm someone who tends to lean heavily on the default default mode network, the DMN. DMP, sorry. I'm sorry, that's a typo. It's DMN, default mode network, not DMP. I'm constantly having to get myself out of that and ask coaching questions that focus on the task positive network, that get people to turn their thinking into, what would you like to do with that? How does that help you move forward in the next 2 weeks? With whom would that be a useful conversation to have? Where do you think this will play out as you go into your workday tomorrow? So be aware of our own dispositions, especially as you go through training, and then start to dance with these. The power is in shifting back and forth and using both of these networks in the coachee's brain and prompting them so that the coachee can get the benefit of both of those. Boyatzis notes that when we provide 360 feedback, that really activates the what am I going to do about it network, right? The task positive network. And we just talked about that. And that seems natural. But his cautionary tale to us was, if you're a coach who's going to coach solely on feedback and turning the feedback into actions, you're missing an entire section of the brain that needs to be coached. That's the default mode network, how to be reflective and introspective. On the next slide, he also shares that the notion of compassion means we are really focusing on empathy primarily. And as coaches, there are two phases of empathy that we demonstrate or experience or put out there to our coaching clients. And that is one where we are in feeling with others. So we are literally in their emotion or tracking with their emotion. We may be even reflecting their emotion and feel the same way they do in the moment. The other is analyzing how the coachee feels. Am I thinking about what emotion is she displaying right now? How is that helping her in this moment? What are the names of the emotions that come up when I see her react this way, when I hear her words, when her nonverbals are telling me a certain emotion, but her verbals are telling me something else? We are analyzing the emotions of others. And Boyatzis suggests that we also as coaches need to be using both forms of empathy. He believes we're probably not feeling with others and taking advantage of our mirror neurons, where we are literally reflecting emotions from each other, and we may not be aware of it, but that both forms of empathy are powerful. That we have to build trusting, resonant relationships with the client, and this goes back to his previous research about building a resonant relationship. While that is kind of a prerequisite for a good coaching relationship, he suggests that every session, we are either doing that or we're tearing it down unintentionally, maybe. So we either continue to build that relationship or we don't. And that we need to maintain some emotional distance to help the client get in touch with their own emotional state. If we're always in the mode of feeling with others, we may be drawn into their emotions too much that we can't help them analyze or reflect on how they're feeling in the moment. So again, being aware of our own dispositions, our preferences as coaches for coaching one form of empathy or the other, or in his words, you're aware of neither. You're not feeling with the coachee, and you're not analyzing how they feel. Then you're doing something else, but it's not coaching. It's not coaching. So I want to take just a moment and ask your thoughts and reflections on, this whole notion of coaching the reflective network of the brain and the action network of the brain, and also how empathy plays in how we coach when we feel with others, or how we analyze, how we step back and help the coachee stay with their own feelings and emotions, and we're not drawn into them. So I'm going to stop the share for a second and just take yourself off mute and offer your own thoughts and perspectives here.
In in terms of ICF and a lot of what we've been learning and talking about here, do the last two concepts, are they not analogous with the who and the what?
Yes, they can be. Who are you being versus what are you doing? Yes.
I think it's important when you're coaching people to definitely step back and have them look at their emotions with you being a little emotionally distant, but also to be empathetic to that and to walk them through how they are with others and how they are with themselves and what they're feeling, and have them identify their feelings, and then have them identify, you know, how can you sit with that, and is that something you want to change?
Excellent. What else?
I think by doing what Jeannie just discussed helps the individual, that helps the coachee become more aware of what might really be the root of the issue, or can provide different types of awareness that you wouldn't normally get if your focus is just on an action. So focusing on that, what we call the who, really gives a little bit deeper into peeling away the onion.
It does. Other observations?
Wouldn't that also, sorry. Wouldn't that also depend on who your coachee is? Or I guess if you're coaching someone on, you know, a business side of the coaching versus somebody that's going through a life difficulty, I think you would tend to maybe adjust those two ways of emphasizing with the client. So I think it's important to understand where they're coming from, I guess, first, before we can use one or the other.
It is. That's a good point. And Boyatzis' approach to that is yes and. So where are they coming from? What seems to be most useful? And don't forget to help the coachee use the other side, right? If they come with more tasks, or I need to get better at this, or I got to do this, then the who they're being and the reflective question is something that we should, as coaches, really put before them so they can consider it. And likewise, if they come to sessions with basically no emotion, right? Then asking about those emotions, like what emotions do you attach to this relationship with this other person? How would you identify how you feel when you approach this piece of work every time it comes across your desk? Then we're missing out on what we're supposed to be doing as coaches, even if the coachee is dominant in one or the other.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, actually, is I'll intentionally dance between both. And if I notice that they tend to gravitate around me wanting to be like compassionate and feel the emotions with them, I'll intentionally like go to analyzing, because it's like, or I'll even like I call it unveil. Like I'll say, hey, do you notice you keep wanting me to do this? You know, like I'll have them see it. Like I'll have them actually not to like, yes, call them out, but also lightly.
Right.
Behavior. Yeah.
Other thoughts, observations?
Actually, I have one more thing. I'll also do neither and disrupt. If they're like going into shame and they're like addicted to certain emotions, like shame, for instance, I will disrupt and get them out of shame to like, whether it's like, I mean, I could do a number of different things, but I'll just get them out of that mindset and go, okay, so we're back. Let's continue our conversation, just so they can come at it from a different energy and perspective.
Yeah. When does one emotion dominate or get in the way? And how do you help the coachee experience or explore or examine another one, or something that's not that emotion, if that's the way they continually lean? Yeah. I'm coaching an IT executive in an energy company, in our first session, he was on the verge of a promotion and was going to find out before our second session whether he got it or not. The first session, I could not get him to reflect or think about his thinking. It was all action oriented, and he was basically telling me the story of his interview and how he wanted what he learned from the interview to be part of coaching, which was fine. But I noticed it was just all very, I was pulling the coaching into the hiring and promotion process. And I thought, okay, that's not going to happen again. So we got to the next session. He had been named, he got the promotion, and now he has these 7 direct reports, and he came with dilemmas. So suddenly he was ready to think, and I didn't have to do much to turn that switch, but I certainly noticed a shift. And if it hadn't happened, I was going to do some disruption to get him to think about the relationships he now has to have with these new direct reports, some of whom were peers. But sometimes you can really see it, sense it, feel it, and it's so prominent, like where a coachee's emotions are or aren't, and whether they're in that action mode and they want the coaching to be around that, or something that's not who they're being and something that's not reflective at all. And then how in a moment or one promotion, it totally wakes them up and they flip.
You're on mute.
Yeah, I'm going to share my screen again and not put myself on mute and move into something that I hope will be helpful and useful for you as a coach, especially if you're a coach in training, or you're thinking about coaching, or you're a great coach, but there are sometimes some sessions, some moments where we may feel overwhelmed or stuck with how to move forward as a coach. And I think it's because our coaching profession is well developed and continues to be researched, developed, growing, competency-based and other-based, that we have a lot to consider, and we have a lot to be as a coach as we move forward. And sometimes the synthesis of all that really kind of lands, and we're using the competencies where we need to, and we're being present, and we're not predetermining a question to ask. And at the same time, we know how a question might be useful in the moment. At other times, we're overwhelmed with all those things we could be or do as a coach. So Damian introduced me to Dr. Paul Brown as part of our coaching supervision program. He's written at least 2 books on the neuropsychology of coaches and for coaches. And he really digs into the neuroscience of who we're being as coaches and what might get in our way. I took another course from him and then talked with him offline about how he is rethinking mindfulness. Now, mindfulness can mean a lot of different things, but as coaches, I think it means how can we take how we know the brain works and use that to be a better coach, maybe even in the moment of trying to be all the things that a coach is supposed to be. So his approach to rethinking mindfulness looks like this. It's that, mindfulness is not just meditation or yoga or reflection or being present or quiet. It really is how your brain's activity works. The activity inside of our brain produces what we see as the mind, right? So all the different lobes, all the different senses, all the different functions, all the emotions, all that together produces what could be called the mind, and that kind of third person thing. And it goes through, our brain goes through this dynamic process to do that for us. One, it takes in information. It uses and emits energy, and it connects and creates relationships between information and energy. So our brain really is this gabillion, some people say 80 billion, maybe more, connections of neurons and synapses and information and oxygen and blood and neurochemicals that flow across and around those. So at any moment, our brain is taking in information and we are actually producing energy. Your brain produces about 20 watts of energy just in its normal activity. And we're looking for the relationship between things, like when we reflect on and think about how can I be a better coach, or what's the burning question the coachee is not asking herself. Our brain does all that together, and it does so continuously and dynamically, and he calls that the mind. So mindfulness is the synthesis, the integration of all those things our brain does well so we can coach. That can be overwhelming and exhausting, especially for those of us in coach training or who are trying to take our coaching to another level, a deeper level, or broaden our coaching skills, or just broaden who we are being as a coach. So in those moments, when you look at the reading list that Damian has given you for the course, and I know it's a long one because he did the same thing to us in supervision, or you think it's just too much for me to consider all at once, to be present and then deliver as a coach to the coachee, I'd like you to think about this. At any moment in your coaching session, you are gathering or using information that you've learned as part of your coach training. You are emanating energy, you are generating energy, and you are sensing the energy of the person whom you're coaching, the person across from you. And some of the things you're doing is helping draw connections or relationships between you and the coachee, between the coachee and her peers, between the coachee and her goals, between the coachee and her 360 feedback. And what I noticed from his work was, if we just think about in the moment of being a coach, that we're really the continuous dynamic integration of all these, I think it helps us be more present. It helps us be mindful in the moment and to put all the detail that we've learned aside for a moment and just to focus on what information, energy, or relationships can be useful right now. How can I tap into what I know, how I feel, and what's connecting for me as a coach to be useful in the next moment with the coachee? As I sit with the coachee in front of me and I hear her speaking or giving report back on the action she's taken since the last session, what's the information that's coming in? What's the energy that I sense from her? And what relationships between what she's saying and doing and her coaching goals seem to exist? I think that helps us dampen our amygdalas, get ourselves less stressed about being a coach, about trying to be all things in every moment to ourselves and the coachee, and lets us copy how our brain actually works, where it's also taking in information and generating and sensing energy and creating neural maps and having synapses spark each other with insights, and to keep the profession of coaching from being so overwhelming or threatening or confusing or ambiguous. So in the moments where you're trying to do your best, try less and just think about information, energy, and relationships and see what comes up as you are being the three of those, as you connect those for yourself and your coachee, as you are the dynamic integrator of those for the coaching hour or the coaching conversation. And also notice that it's a continuous type of thing. It's probably happening throughout the entire coaching session that you have, whether it's 30 minutes or an hour or a 4-hour deep dive into a lot of feedback data. So I hope that's helpful. It's an evolving model that Paul Brown is using, and it's one that I've asked him to help introduce to people who lead complex professions. I've introduced this to HR professionals, who have a extremely broad set of functions that they lead, to coaches who are trying to be something and do something at the same time, and also to coach supervisors, where in addition to being reflective and in the moment, our experiences and our emotions are invited into the coaching supervision session we have with a coach. So I'd just like to hear your thoughts on, as you are being a coach, how do you manage or connect with the complexities and sometimes the confusion of being a coach?
For me, I think learning from our coaches. So being in a session, it makes us think our own problems, right, and organize our brain sometimes. So I always try to take things from our coaching sessions. That's one of the things I try to do, and it really helps. That I'm also learning, not just my coachee.
That's great. Be in a learning mode, be reflective about what happened in the session, even afterwards. Yeah, that's a great approach. What else is coming up for you with this notion of being mindful as a coach or managing all there is to do in being a coach?
For me, I think, first of all, it's a privilege to be able to coach people. So I am usually right before the session really intense and nervous and want to make sure that's a great session. So some of the same things that we talked about at the beginning of this session, coming in, taking deep breaths, really being centered, just kind of focusing and releasing helps me. My mentor was telling me I also need to trust the process. I have a tendency, based on my HR exposure, to wanting to have solutions and help people get to those solutions. So what I'm learning is to trust the process, really practice active listening, and to focus on what the client is saying and to go with the client. So not having a preconceived or a set of questions that I have to ask at a certain time.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. That HR experience example is a really good one. It's my background as well. When I worked at Humana, I taught the top 100 HR. There were 600 people in HR. The top 100 people in HR were business unit leaders, right, in human resources. And I taught them basically 8 brain-based coaching questions so they could help spark insights on the leadership teams where they served in all the different departments and business units across Humana. So I did a 4-month Coach Light program with them and taught them how to have these coaching conversations, and they practiced with each other. And I thought, this would be great because, in HR, we should be better at asking questions. So at the end of the experience, I asked them 2 questions. The first, and this can apply to anybody, so I use HR as an example because that's where it came from for me, but the first question I asked was, are you confident in the 8 questions that you've learned and how these conversations go? And all 100 HR pros said, yes, I'm 100% confident. I know what I'm doing. I know what those questions are. I know how to do this. The second question I asked was, do you have the courage to go back to your business units and to ask these questions when there's a dilemma, or to help your business leaders think differently? And half of them, 50 of them, people I know in my company, my HR colleagues said, no way, no how, never, not gonna do it. And I thought, why wouldn't you have the courage to do that? And they said the same thing you did, Myrna, which is, I am HR. I am the answer ATM. I'm the person who's supposed to have all the solutions. If I go into that business and start asking questions, they're going to throw me out. This whole fear of having the courage, right, to be the coach or to be in that moment that is ambiguous or that is a different role that people expected us to be is frankly what your coach training is all about. So you're probably not like that. You're not indicative of that because you're already in coach training, and those of you who are guests, you're considering it. But don't let whatever you are before you were a coach or however you've been trained be the thing that keeps you from being courageous in taking in information, energy, and relationships, and in the moment, figuring out how to be a great coach, because it's not just all of the answers and solutions you have. It might be the process that works. It might be you just being quiet that works. It might be the disruptive question you ask. It might be here's what I'm noticing is going on between us as we coach today. Whatever that is, have the courage to do that and to not let the coachee or the organization or another stakeholder kind of put you back in that mode of being the answer person or kind of knowing it all. That dynamic integration of information, energy, and relationships, how we're mindful, is what makes us great coaches, I think. Other thoughts?
I would agree that being a solution-based worker for so many years is a large shift. And I think trying to get emotions out of people can be difficult, but I think that takes patience. It takes silence. It takes powerful questions. And it takes you being comfortable with you don't have the answers for them. They have to come up with the answers for themselves. So then you have to think about, if you've asked a question twice and they are not understanding what you're trying to get at, you have to rethink your questions and try and get at it at another angle. So, and I struggle with trying not to give them the solution because of my background.
Yeah. Other observations and thoughts?
I think one way that I can connect with the complexities is just being curious. I find that when I'm on that call, no matter what else is going on, even if before I'm like, oh man, I don't have time for this coaching call, I got 8 other things to do. And it's almost like going to the gym. As soon as you go, you're like, yes, it was, well, for me. So I was so, afterwards, it was so great. And on that call, and I am so present. I can't wait to ask the next question. I actually have to control my brain a little bit because I'm already thinking of the next question I have to ask them, or they say something and I want to know more about it. I want to know what's under that. And I've again learned so many techniques in this course too, to instead say, well, which way do you want to go? I'm observing this many things. Where do you want to go? You know, and again, not the co-creating a little bit more, but again, to bring this back, the curiosity to me is really fun. And again, being that HR background, moving away from the solutions for a moment, there was a limit to what we could ask. Interviewing maybe, but HR, we had to stay pretty much, you know, I can't really know what your feelings are, you know, so now it's kind of fun to ask questions that I haven't asked for years because I have to say holiday party, not Christmas party. You know, so it's really fun to be that present and that curious. And sometimes I could stay on the call for 2 hours with somebody. Actually, Jeannie and I did a coaching session and it was really fun. And I kept asking her more and more questions and our 20 minutes were up and I was like, come on, I've got more to ask you. I want to learn more. So I think that really helps me. And it's what's fun about it too.
Yeah. When we're curious, our emotions, our amygdala drops to neutral to slightly positive. Our prefrontal cortex is open. We're off of our automatic long-term memory and our past experience. And there's nothing we can do but be present. It's a natural state when we are curious. Yeah. That's why I love the whole notion of, it's not just a buzzword. You know, if you're a coach, just stay curious. It literally gets your brain in that mode, that coaching mentality, that state, that emotional state where you have the opportunity to be the best possible coach you can be. And, you know, I appreciate what someone else just said about, you know, like before a session, I might get nervous and I'm a little tense. In addition to coaching, I'm a professional speaker. And one of the things I've learned from professional speaking and other speakers is, you know, every time I get ready to step on a stage and do a keynote, I am a nervous wreck. And I can do a lot of things to kind of calm myself down, which I do, but there is a certain amount of adrenaline or awareness and attention that comes into our brains when we are a little nervous, a little stressed. It helps us focus. So I appreciate the fact that we can embrace our tension before we step into a coaching session and then quickly adjust into that mindfulness model to know and believe that we've got all that we need. And that when we focus on information and energy and relationships and who we are and what we're observing and we stay curious, we're likely to be a very good coach to an awesome, spectacular coach. Because like in speaking, once I do step on the stage, I'm in my element and it just flows. The tension is gone and now we're underway, right? Okay, so I'm going to share my contact information, and now's the time for open Q&A, dialogue amongst yourselves and myself based on all the things I've shared and what's been coming up for you in your brain as we've talked. What kind of questions do you have? What kind of information do you want to share? What kind of pushback or opposing points of view do you want to share? Just take yourself off mute and come forward.
So you mentioned 8 brain-based questions. Are you willing to share those with us? Or are they in your book?
No, they're in the book that I co-authored with my friends, Humans at Work. But they really are, you know, future-focused questions. What's the purpose and vision look like when this is resolved 6 months from now? What are you seeing and experiencing? Name the emotion that you're experiencing right now. On a scale of 1 to 10, where 10 is my thinking's really clear, and a 1 is it's as clear as mud. Where's your thinking right now? What's the one thing that needs to exist so you can move that from a 5 to a 6 or a 2 to a 3? What's the +1? What have you not thought about that's useful here? What's the next thing you need to do or be to move yourself forward? What is it you need from me as your coach or people around you? What needs to exist so you can do that next? And what do you want to pat yourself on the back for and acknowledge? What kind of gratitude do you want to give to yourself for doing that? So yeah, it's not any questions you haven't heard or learned, but I've crafted a few that resonated with the Humana culture and that several leaders seem to use as part of their, as they came out of coaching and over and over again. But they're the kinds of coaching questions that you can use in meetings, project updates, one-on-ones, performance reviews, all those types of things. So they're general enough that anyone can be leader as coach, right? Even though they may not be a coach like you, they could be a leader as coach in the moment and ask a probing, reflective question.
The name of your other book was Future Focused?
No, the book was called Humans at Work.
Okay, thanks.
And it's available on Amazon. I co-authored it with some HR and coaching friends of mine. We don't receive any money from it. All the proceeds go to the SHRM Foundation, Society for Human Resource Management, to fund scholarships for people who want to go into the people profession and become HR professionals. The other book that I co-authored was called Rethinking Human Resources. And it was, the chapter I wrote in that book was the call to action for HR professionals to be better at asking questions and not to be the answer ATM all the time. How to get out of your comfort zone and be more courageous as an HR professional and ask questions instead of just having answers all the time.
Great, thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome, my pleasure. Other questions for each other or for me?
Jeff, neuropsychology and neurobiology have changed a lot in the last 10 years. It seems I have not a bit of a background in that. And it seems like in 10 years, if we go 10, 15 years ago, it was very like causal effect. Like, no, this part is clearly about, let's say, speaking, or this is clearly about this. And that has shifted around the years. It's more complex than that. How do you see, and obviously you've been studying this, how does that modify or adapt or more make complex what you presented in this today?
That's a great question. So I think there's two things that have led to how we use the brain now and what we know versus 10 or 15 years ago. The first is I don't know who we is, but we finally got neuroscientists and researchers to focus on, I'll call them regular normally acting brains. They weren't just focused on clinical challenges with the brain, right? A prefrontal lobe that was damaged, or brain tumors, or a brain that was not functioning typically, if you will. So we got them to focus on research that was on the average brain in its regular state without a clinical problem present. The second thing is technology. Once we got functional MRIs and we could actually see where the blood was flowing, that's a proxy for here's where activity is occurring and here's where it's not. And what's the dynamic between those? We now have a new tool that shows where oxygen molecules are flowing, and it's going to blow a lot of the things I'm sure I'm telling you now out of the water with even better applications that show where oxygen is actually making things happen in the brain versus just blood flowing. So that helps researchers and scientists and others get better at saying, here's what's happening. With respect to the different parts of the brain, yeah, there's still your senses are in certain parts of the brain, and they reside there. Your amygdala actually touches the hippocampus, and that's why there's a strong emotional attachment to really difficult, challenging, violent, or threatening memories, is because those are stored in the hippocampus, and physiologically they touch each other. So when those emotions are triggered, that's what we remember. And what we now know is the brain's not compartmentalized, right? It's actually the integration of how the brain works is what we're seeing because of technology. The corpus callosum, right? The bridge between your left and right hemisphere. While we always had these left and right hemisphere theories, it turns out they're not quite as separate as they used to be. The corpus callosum is one bridge that helps the brain be an integrator as opposed to a separator. And when you have a strong positive emotional reaction and you get neurochemicals like a burst of dopamine or a burst of oxytocin, those neurochemicals wash over your entire brain. They don't just like focus on a little pocket of your brain. That's why when you sit down to your favorite meal, or you see a loved one get off of an airplane and you're waiting for them at the airport and you haven't seen them in a while, or you have an insight about something that helps you move forward, your brain doesn't know the difference between those things. It's the same wash of dopamine, the same wash of oxytocin that just makes you feel good all over. So I think what we're learning now is it's much more of an integrated, and that's why Paul Brown's work I think is so helpful. It's the integration of what's happening in the brain, not the pinpointing and triggering of what's happening in the brain. For example, we know what happens in the amygdala. We think we see what happens in the prefrontal cortex, but it's the dynamic between those two that comes to play in all that we are and all that we do, especially in coaching and supervision. It's not that you're going to get rid of amygdala hijacks. It's when they happen, how can I dampen them? And now there's 5 ways, right, in the PowerPoint to do that. And it's not that emotions aren't important, but when someone's on an emotional extreme, they're not likely to have a new insight or an idea. So when the time is right, how do we help them dampen that emotion so they can reflect and think about what's the key learning? That's where I think we're headed, and I'm very anxious and excited and looking forward to dispelling more myths as technology improves and we get neuroscientists and other researchers focused on people's brains, especially for me and my clients at work. The functional MRI cap studies where there's a leader and they ask a question to the team, and the team has on functional MRI caps, and we see how that lands or literally distances the team from their leader, right? That's the kind of research I think can be really useful to me as an executive coach and to my clients.
So Jeff, I think that this was amazing. Thank you for taking the time to do this class today. Last week we talked about emotional intelligence. So people can see now the relationship between emotional intelligence and how the brain works. So you can put these two things together. So by understanding how the brain works, we can be better prepared to work with our clients, but also it's a good reminder for ourselves, because I think we can all use a little bit of that, when we are getting emotional, what are the kind of things that work, based on research and science. So I don't know if there are any last question before we wrap up. So maybe
thank you all very much. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I don't have a question. I just wanted to share some appreciation and thank you for the information that you've given us. It's very valuable, and I took a lot of notes, and I'll be checking out your books too. So thank you.
It's my
And thank you
pleasure.
for
My
your
pleasure. You're
contribution
welcome.
to CERM.
Yeah, I would agree with Myrna. I thought that was a very valuable session, and I appreciate you taking your time.
Thank you again. Just want to say thank you, because it really helped me thinking, you know, it just puts some things together, and definitely some things I'm going to look into. So greatly appreciate it.
I'm so grateful too. I took a lot of notes on the side here that I'm like curious to revise.
Thank you all very much. Enjoy the rest of your course, and thank you for being great coaches. I'm so excited to have you as part of the profession. Thank you all. Have a great day.
Thank you,
Thank
Jeff.
you.
Really appreciate you with us today. And if anybody in the future is interested in working with a supervisor, Jeff can be a good resource. So it's good that he left the information, because he can be really great to work with when you are working with clients and you want to bring your cases to discuss with a colleague. So thank you for being
Thanks,
here.
Damian. Thanks.
Okay.
My pleasure. Bye-bye.
Bye. So before everybody goes,
Thank
just an
you.
announcement. Before everybody leaves, just one brief announcement. I want to thank our guests that were with us today. And for the participants, we have 2 more classes to go. If you know anybody who may be interested in the program, we're starting our next program in March. So please let people know. For people, Go Coach Go, I'm going to be doing a session on Tuesday. I was invited to do like a brief presentation. So I will get to see, I don't know if you were invited already or not. Some of you will be there or not. And then in terms of next week, what we're going to do is working with Lego. So I want to show you something creative, something different, like just before we finish the program, just to do a different technique. So in coaching, it's not all necessarily conversation. You can also work with different tools. And one is Lego. Now, if you have at home kids, or you can get Legos to work with, great. If you don't, you can still learn by seeing other people do it. But if you have a chance and a way to get it, it's like we're going to have a group coaching session where I'm going to be coaching you as a group. So the people who are going to participate are going to be working on their own issues with their own Lego, and the rest are going to observe. So if you can do that, I hope that you can take this opportunity. So I will see you next week. And then the last one is going to be, there is a requirement for ACF, is to do an essay exam. It's an essay exam, an open book. So I will give it to you this week, so you have a couple of weeks to work on it. List is more, so just be short in the answers. Okay, so remember, short, don't write a lot, answer the question, okay? And that will help you to pass the exam that you will need to do with International Coach Federation choice. So this is aligned to that. So the idea is test will help you to prepare for that.
So Damian, how short is short and how long is long?
The short is a couple of paragraphs.
Paragraphs.
Couple of paragraphs, yeah, sentences each, something like that. Short, not a lot. Like let's say 2,000 words for 14 questions. I think it's 12 or 13 questions. The most it should be 2,000 words for the whole thing.
Okay.
Okay, so that's short. Just answer the question. Okay, it's not difficult, but you need to take some time. And it's a requirement for ACF. So I'm going to ask everybody to post it in Basecamp. So you have 2 weeks to do it this week and the following week. So the last session we're going to go through the exam.
Damian, you said.
By the way, listen to this. It's an exam that you already passed. Okay, so not how I have to do this exam. I'm going to pass the exam. No, it's an exam.
Sorry, I missed that. Could you say it?
There's really bad feedback on here.
Yeah, I don't know what is the sound from coming. Okay, now it's gone, isn't it? Yeah, one of the, yeah.
Damian, you said that you're going to post it in Basecamp?
I'm going to post it today. But this is an exam that you already passed, but you have to still do it. Okay.
We're still live, everybody.
So basically, no, I'm not going to pass this exam. Everybody's passing the exam, but you need to do it because it's a requirement. Okay, and it's a good way to summarize all of the learnings for the program. So the questions are essay questions for you to, but the idea is just answer the question, go to the point, and it's going to be a good summary for you. So you should spend no more than, it should take you 1 hour between 1 hour and 90 minutes. So sometimes I do the program, the test in class with the participants. Here, because it's virtual, you're going to do it by yourself, by your own, with the open book. But usually it takes between 1 hour and 90 minutes to answer this. Any questions before we go? Yes, Mirna.
It's not related to what you covered, but I had a coachee Day asked me if she decided to have her recording deleted, would I get credit for it? So if we have individuals who decide to have it deleted, are we able to record that or no?
Of course, because you only record the sessions to have material for your mentor coach. You know, so it's not mandatory to record all of the sessions. You are recording sessions so you can have your mentor coaches. So if you need to delete everything, you don't need to keep anything. Like there is not a requirement from ICF to record the sessions, but it's a requirement from ICF to get mentor coaching, and you need to get mentor coaching through your sessions. So you need to record them, but you don't need to keep them. You can erase them after you have your mentor coaching session.
But can you just clarify that for me? I thought we were submitting one of the coaching sessions to the ICF.
Yes, you do that at the end. You need to send one session, but we're not required to be recording all of your sessions.
Right. Okay, but we are submitting one to the ICF.
You're going to do one to ICF, and you still, with your mentor coach, you should have a conversation about one of the sessions that you got that was good enough for you to send.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, everybody should have that. Everybody should have discussed with your mentor coach what session is good for you to send to ICF to be evaluated. And you would need to send that on the transcription.
Yeah, do we have to send it by the end of this class or when we submit the 1,000 hours, right? Okay.
When you get to the 100 hours.
The 100, yeah, okay, 100, thank you.
And about the test that we take, not the essay, but the multiple choice test, I know you've touched on it a little bit, and you've kind of given a little guidance that there's 2 right answers and it should be based on everything we've gone through, but will you be giving any more guidance or about that test or what we should expect?
You are very prepared to do that test than anybody else because you are working with a good book of coaching competencies around ICF core competency model. So I don't think there is anybody better prepared to pass this test than all of you that went through this program that is all around ICF core competency.
And can we take that before we submit the 100 hours? Or do we do the 100 hours, the recording, and the test all at the same time?
You need to get the 100 hours, and when you have the 100 hours, you apply.
And then you do the test and the recording.
When you apply, ICF look at all of your things and do the test.
No, but you do the test now, and then when you finish your 100 hours, you submit it all to the ICF. No.
No, the ICF test, no. You do our test in this program, yes. The essay test, yes, I do it now. But the ICF test, you do it when when they go through your material, they go through your certificate and your recording and everything, and when that all of that you get to do that test.
Okay.
So the test will be after we submit our 100 hours and all of our material and our recording, and then we'll take the ICF test.
Yes.
Okay, and are there examples of the ICF test anywhere that we can practice on?
No, but you don't have to worry. It's not easy, but it's not difficult. So it's all about using what you learn in this program. It's all cases. They are all cases, and then they ask you what you need to do. So, for example, they may ask you, okay, your client, the clients bring in different topics. And what do? You decide what you think is better. You decide what you think will be more helpful for today for the short term versus long term. You ask the client what the client wants to work on. And what would you choose?
So it's multiple choice, some of it.
You ask the client what the client wants to work on.
Yeah, I hope you answered that question. You always, the client always has the answers. So whatever they ask you, you know what the client wants is what you need to go.
So that's the Cliff Note version that you're telling us there. Got it. It's always the client. Got it.
With the client. It's always what the client thinks, and it's all about co-creating. So everything that we talk in the program, so you are well prepared to do the test. When I am saying it's not easy, it's not something that you can do meanwhile you are cooking or doing something else. You need to sit and really focus and pay attention And you don't want to do it at the end of the day that you're exhausted. You want to do it at one point when you're fresh, clear, and you can really focus, because it requires a lot of focus. But it doesn't, it's not, most people pass it. There is a high level of pass rate.
So that test is a take-home test, and we have a certain amount of time to finish it and get it back.
I'm sorry?
ICF test is a take-home test, and then we do it and send it back.
It's a take-home test that they give you 2 hours. So you start doing it and you have 2 hours to finish it. And you have like 150 items. So you have to go fast. And you have to be focused and you have to be present.
When you said that most people pass the test, that's good news. How about the recordings?
The recordings for ACC is very difficult not to pass it, because
so our level, it's very difficult not to pass it. So almost everybody passes it.
The ACC, yes. The PCC, if they don't have this training, people don't pass it because they don't know what they need to do based on this model. So some of you have not done this program and you send the recording, you may have not passed. But many of you, the same recording that you have for ACC, you may be able, is already at the PCC level, because you are training this program for PCC, not for ACC. So some of the recordings later, when you get to the 500 hours, you may be able to use the same recording, because some of the recordings are at really the level, not the ACC. Yeah. So check. Ask your mentor coach too if the recording was at the PCC level or at the ACC level. Okay, we need to wrap up. Everyone, we'll see you next week. Okay, take care. Bye bye.